Welcome back to the Line Podcast. My name is Aaron Alexander. Today's beautiful episode is brought to you by my book that I would be so honored for y'all to pre-order or purchase, depending on when you're listening to this. It comes out Christmas Eve, December 24th, 2019. It's called The Align Method, and it is a compilation of all that I've gathered on this podcast over the last 5 years, working with clients over the last 16 years, essentially as a user's manual on how to effectively inhabit your body in daily life. How do we integrate the principles that we learn from martial arts or weightlifting or yoga into who we are as opposed to a thing that we do? It also gets into the way that sound affects our physiology, how we can leverage that as a tool, sight, touch, body language, all the things. And just been so humbled and just so greatly appreciate y'all's support. The book writing process has been probably one of the most developmental experiences of my life, and I'm so greatly excited, appreciative, all those things, to get to share that with you. So thanks again for grabbing it, the Align Method book. Today's beautiful conversation was with my friend, Mr. Ben Greenfield. Ben is literally one of the smartest humans in the world around I'd say exercise physiology, fitness in general, biohacking, which is kind of a strange word, but anything that you would put into the category of a biohack in quotations, Ben knows a lot about it. In this conversation, we go beyond that, and we go into some more intimate parts of Ben's life and family, and it's really a beautiful conversation. So I greatly appreciate y'all's tagging along and tuning in. I hope you love it. Thanks for checking out the website, alignpodcast.com, ALIGN podcast.com. On there, you can find the Align Method book. And you can also start the free 5-day movement challenge. Start getting some better movement in your daily life. Today's beautiful episode is brought to us by Organifi. Organifi are absolutely a friend of mine, a friend of the podcast, and I trust that company to deliver the highest of quality of supplements. Everything that they are sourcing in their blends is the best of the best. And I'm holding in my hands the turmeric and reishi infused gold blend. It is USDA organic. It's gluten-free. It is vegan. It's soy-free. This stuff is delicious. It's really beautiful to pour some of this into like a tea or a smoothie to add some delicious flavor and also a lot of anti-inflammatory compounds that can help sort out them joints of yours. In the back, they have a nighttime body-soothing herbal tea, a superfood hot chocolate packed with nature's most calming herbs. That's this stuff. Recommend it. Really good. Their protein powders are delicious, and they're great. So you can get yourself 15% off of your purchases with Organifi by going to Organifi.com, Organifi.com, and then type in Align at checkout, and you will get 15% off of your purchase. All right, here we go. Back to the show with legendary Mr. Ben Greenfield. Thanks so much for tuning in. Pow.
Align Podcast.
Found in the course of this podcast is my own dispensability. So how's your levels over there, Benjamin?
Checky check, Mike, checky 1, 2, 3.
Wow.
Welcome to Good Morning LA with me, Ben Greenfield,
crazy profound.
And my weatherman, Aaron Alexander.
Crazy profound.
He's going to tell us about all the sports scores last night from the latest high school basketball games, along with what kind of thunderstorms to expect this afternoon.
Yeah.
What's that? I can clap us in. Yeah. That was
like a bitch.
That was kind of a shitty clap.
Clapping.
Tony Robbins
That's
clap. What kind of tea are we drinking? What is this?
This is some green tea from, you probably know the guy. Do you know Tea Dragon? Ryan Tea Garden? Call him Tea Dragon. That was incorrect.
Green tea makes me nauseous.
Oh, perfect. All
yeah,
right.
This will be a great podcast. Healer's tea, dragon tea.
I'm glad that we're starting off.
What makes this really good green tea?
I would like to learn more about green tea. That's why I have you here, is ask you questions about things of that nature.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the primary, most researched component in it is the EGCG, the epigallocatechins.
I feel like you're making
something
that up.
Like that. It's along. I was somewhat close. It's epigallocatechin something. EGCG is far easier,
right.
However, and that's the potent antioxidant. But this stuff also has goji berry, schizandra, which is amazing. That's a really good adaptogen.
Yeah, with the name
Chinese
like
licorice
Shazam.
root. Schizandra also, I was having dinner with someone a couple weeks ago, and they informed me that one of the best things you could do for your sperm and your fertility is to regularly consume schizandra. So I suppose the opposite could be true as well. Probably the most potent contraceptive is to never take schizandra.
I feel like that's going to be an ongoing thing. Like every 6 months to a year, there's a new
something that helps your swimmers.
something that helps your sperm count.
Yep. And Great Salt Lake Trace Minerals. Wow, it's kind of like East meets West. They got salt from Utah and green tea from Japan.
Yeah, we got the whole thing.
Amazing.
So I'm going on.
Also known as honeymooners tea for those engaged in frequent sexual activity.
That's why I brought it out, man.
Wow.
Yep.
How cool.
We were just nude.
We were just in
minutes
your
ago.
in your heart-shaped cold pool plunge. That was I suppose since we video recorded it, that it's likely that folks listening in are going to somehow get their hands on that video that we did.
Yep.
But we did a breathe up before we got in the cold pool, and I'm glad we did that because a lot of people don't realize how much easier cold thermogenesis is after you've done that breathe up.
Yep.
And you were kind of the leader on that, but it was basically those 30 breaths, those 30 kind of like, and then the finish with the exhale. The cool thing is the activation of the parasympathetic nervous system.
Yep.
Right? So you don't have that harsh mammalian dive reflex when you get in the cold pool and that sharp intake of breath. When you get in, you feel as though you have this peace and calm. So you don't have that reaction to the cold. And then from a physiological standpoint, you get that nitric oxide release, which is why some people get a little bit lightheaded. Not only breathing off the CO2, but that opening up of all the blood vessels that, if you're not careful, can actually cause you to pass out.
Yeah. And then with the nitric oxide release, the other thing that's interesting from that is just doing something as simple as humming. That's been shown. I think it's like 20 times increase the nitric oxide production in your bloodstream. And then beyond that is just generally breathing through your nose.
Yeah, which is cool. All this stuff stacks because at the same time that you're doing humming or chanting or singing or even gargling, you activate the vagus nerve. You increase your vagal nerve tone, which further feeds into that parasympathetic activation. So it's almost as though you are inducing stress resilience before you get into something that is mildly stressful, like cold.
Yeah, it's amazing to me how many of these beneficial variables that we have access to that we kind of completely bypass throughout the day. It's almost like I think I personally feel like can be addicted to the stress state. And then when we have those brief moments, typically someone, in this case, it's like I usually start out making fun of it and, being silly about it. And then afterwards, it's always like, wow, I'm so glad that we did that.
Yeah, the same could be said of sunlight, right? I mean, the growing body of research on sunlight. I was looking at one study today on insulin sensitivity and glucose regulation in response to sunlight, and the shift in what would be called metabolic flexibility or substrate utilization, meaning that you would ideally want your cells to very efficiently shift from glucose utilization to fatty acid utilization. In the same way that you would want your heart to be able to respond to cues from the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system, right? That is the definition, really, of increased heart rate variability or good vagal nerve tone is the ability of the heart to respond in very precise manner to input from sympathetic and parasympathetic, and how that innervates the heart via the pacemaker of the heart, the sinoatrial node. And in the same way, you want your cells to be able to shift very efficiently from glucose to fatty acid utilization, right? A lot of people think you should just be in a state of ketosis, pure fatty acid utilization all the time, but that's not necessarily the case, right? You want to shift from carbohydrate to fat utilization depending on whether you need to quickly burst or sprint or climb a flight of stairs, to going back into fatty acid utilization when you're sitting at your desk, so to speak. Sunlight, though, is a cue for increasing that metabolic flexibility. So you can increase your ability to be able to utilize these different substrates if you're getting light exposure. And of course, there are tons of benefits that I'm sure people listening in have heard, from the sun, from the vitamin D activation to the mild cellular resilience effect you get from the UVA and the UVB radiation, to the nitric oxide, to the activation of the this is the reason a lot of people use those infrared light panels, the cytochrome C oxidase in mitochondria. Like, you shift that into greater production of ATP in response to sunlight.
Yeah.
So, cold, breathing, sunlight, being outside barefoot, all this stuff just stacks.
Yeah, it's all free. It's all simple. Most of the stuff that's the most expensive, like Carl Jung talked about, retrogressions is going to be the most sustainable and the most cost-effective way to be healthier, to be more mindful, to be all things. When we seek out new advanced technology, typically it's more expensive and more short-lived.
Yeah. I was in San Diego like 2 months ago, and these biohacking clinics are becoming more common. They pop up, and people put the cryotherapy and the sauna and the PEMF and all the fancy technologies, the negative ion structured water that you breathe. And I was in San Diego, and this company reached out to me on Instagram, and they're like, why don't you come over to our clinic this morning, and you can do the pulsed electromagnetic field therapy, and get the Schumann resonance from the earth, and do the cryo, do the infrared, and maybe we can get you in for a Juve session where you're under the lights. And I'm reading this, and I'm like, 4 blocks from the beach.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm like, actually, I'm going to walk in my bare feet to the beach under the sunlight, jump in the cold water, chock full of negative ions and minerals, get out and walk back to my little condo I was staying in, and get all that for free in a far more natural way. Not that biohacking technology should be dismissed, but those should be stacked on top of the natural living, or used when you don't have access to that stuff. Like, whatever, you're in Las Vegas, you're going to be there for 3 days at a conference. Go there with your grounding and earthing mat that you can sleep on, and maybe a portable infrared light panel, and maybe a little portable PEMF unit, and use biohacking to simulate nature in an environment where you're not going to get exposed to much nature. But when you get a chance to choose between nature or biohacking, nature is always usually a more prudent choice.
Well, I think it's the difference between a supplement and a whole food. When you're biohacking some aspect of nature into some technology, it's like taking pectin out of an apple, or carotene, or it's like
lycopene from a tomato.
Yeah. What we miss with that is the equation that you jump your biology into when you jump into the ocean is so much more complex than most of the specific isolates that we take out from that and plug into a wall.
It's the entourage effect, and
exactly.
Of course that's most well known in the world of cannabis, right? We know that all the constituents of the hemp plant put together are more beneficial than like a synthetic CBD extract that you might take to help you sleep. The exception to that would be when you do need to take the bullet train, right? We could.
Yeah,
I always get worried when
I just get exactly.
Wait, we weren't recording. Shit! What a useless, what a completely useless conversation we just had. I hate to talk to people when we aren't recording. The exception to that though would be when you do want the bullet train. I guess I am going to just start shamelessly plugging, but if you look at something like the Juve light, right? Like these infrared light panels that you can spend 10 minutes in front of and get the equivalent of the infrared light that you would need to be out in the sun for 2 hours to get, right? And maybe risk excess UVA radiation from the sun trying to get that big of a dose of infrared all at once. Well, arguably, the biohacking technology actually is a hack. You're shortcutting your way to getting even more infrared than you might normally be able to get. The same could be said of the big, powerful, high milligauss potential PEMF tables, right? The ones that produce a very high amount of that frequency, like 7.8 hertz, that you'd get from the planet Earth, but that just concentrates it in a very high dose, so you're almost amplifying the anti-inflammatory effects of earthing or grounding, but in a faster manner, right? So I have nothing against better living through science about using even more powerful versions of what we might be able to get from nature, but return to that whole entourage effect, the idea of it being free, the idea of being more connected to the planet that we live upon, I still think that too many people put too much time into the biohacking technologies and not enough time into the nature technologies.
Yeah. What about meditation? How's that played a role in your wellness?
I don't meditate in the sense that I think a lot of people think of meditation that much. There are a few forms of meditation that I tend to do on a regular basis, such as one called eco meditation, designed by Dawson Church. I like it because it combines breath work, in this case about 6 count in and 6 count out, with tapping. And so you're basically getting yourself into a state of mindfulness and loving kindness, and then tapping when you're in that state, so that when you're out of that state, simply by tapping, you can access it more quickly. And that practice also involves gratefulness. It involves sending beams of light and love out to the universe, but then into your body, into areas that might be tense or might, that feel like they might need a little bit of extra self-love. I really like that one. You can Google it. It's like a free MP3 you can download, and it just works for me because it stacks all these things at once. So that one's called Eco Meditation. For a couple of years, I practiced TM after taking a TM course, and didn't quite have the time to do the full 2 by 10 to 20 minutes a day, and almost felt as though I was frustrating myself by not doing it with the frequency with which it's actually recommended.
Right.
So I didn't stay on the TM bandwagon, although I occasionally still do that. For example, on a plane when I can't sleep, but I want to still relax my mind and just go into a mantra and stay there for a while. When I wake in the morning, I typically will be in bed for about 5 minutes, just doing deep breathing, giving myself that affluence of time before I leap out of bed. Then I read something typically devotional or scriptural, and then gratitude journal. What am I grateful for today? What truth did I discover in today's reading? And who is one person who I can pray or help or serve this day? And for me, that breath work and gratitude practice when I first wake, it has the flavor of meditation. Like, it leaves me with that same type of feeling as though I've meditated. Before every meal, I typically do about 5 to 10 deep breaths in through the nose and out through the mouth to activate the parasympathetic system in almost a brief mindfulness meditation snack. And I realized that this is something that I think kind of annoys a lot of meditation devotees. I consider my exercise to be moving meditation.
Yeah.
Like, if you see me exercising, there is never hard driving rock music in my headphones, anything like, occasionally an audiobook or a podcast, but my workout sessions are very focused around breath. They lead with prana, so I'm always focusing on the breathing in through the nose, usually out through slightly pursed lips, the same as when I'm walking. It's always moving meditation, typically with like a 4 count in, 4 count hold, 4 count out, 4 count hold, or based on Patrick McCown's teachings in The Oxygen Advantage, or Anders Olsen's teachings in his book, I believe it's called The Power of Breath or The Power of Air or something like that, 10 count in and a 20 count out. Right, so I'm retaining oxygen and carbon dioxide simultaneously. And when I walk like that for 30 minutes or 45 minutes or 60 minutes, especially in the sand, on the beach, on a forest trail, to me, it's almost better than seated meditation.
Yeah.
I feel more grounded when I do that. And in the workout sessions, when the going gets hard and when you're getting up towards your VO2 max, I will shift into breathing through the mouth, sucking air. But then the trick is, after that set's done, after that high intensity interval bout is done, I'll then return back into that nasal breathing. Very similar to the way that Paul Chek teaches. For example, you'll do a set of kettlebell swings, and that would be the working out, and then you follow that up with the working in, which would be very slow, almost like Tai Chi-esque bodyweight squats, where you're just in flow, breathing through your nose, focusing on reactivating the parasympathetic system. And then one other kind of cool way to do that related to the ice, and I do this with some of the folks that I coach. I call it the 3x3. They'll do 3 minutes of some kind of like high intensity cardio, like the Aerodyne bike or, treadmill, rowing machine, whatever. And following those 3 minutes, they will then get into the cold, deep nasal breathing, box breathing, activate the parasympathetic nervous system in the cold, and then out of the cold, you go back into the high intensity interval training. So you're basically training sympathetic, parasympathetic, return to that idea of being metabolically flexible with substrate utilization. You're again training yourself to be flexible with parasympathetic, sympathetic activation.
Yeah.
So
I think so many of the practices that we do there's so much minutia in them oftentimes, and we can become consumed by the specific details. But I think in large part, the details are valuable, but then also in large part, one of the greatest values is just that we're starting to pay attention. So I found that with archery at this point, hunting soon, going to the archery range and paying attention first to the positioning of my feet. Okay, cool. I'm grounded through my feet. Okay, cool. And then drop the shoulders in. Okay, and then pull the elbow back and retract the scapula.
Yep.
And then from there, okay, cool. Now I got to get the sight. Now I got to now breathe. I forgot my breath. Holding my breath. Okay, emphasize the breath out. Calm down. Okay, all right. That moment, it's really hard to be thinking about Bill's girlfriend, whatever the thing is.
You can't, and I'm excited for you, especially because I know you have a history of meditation and mindfulness and a great deal of body awareness. I'm excited to see how that manifests for you once you get out on your hunt coming up in Maui, and you need to activate all of that you've made automatic when there's an actual animal in front of you. And it's all of a sudden there's an enormous responsibility, right? There's a life on the line. There's potential suffering for the animal on the line. There is, from a deep primal standpoint, even though you probably have like a few canisters of protein powder at home and a few things you could survive on for a little longer, there's like that idea of, this is my food, right? Like, I'm not gonna live to see another day unless I put this animal down and bring something home, to the tribe, to the village to cook. And that sounds silly to a lot of people who say, we don't have to hunt for food. There's grocery stores everywhere. But for some reason, at least I've experienced, like, that same primal mechanism kicks in to where you're like, this is it, do or die. Like, I have to survive to live another day, so I need to put this meat in the freezer.
Yeah, we all have that in us. Have you ever heard of a book called Paradise Made in Hell? It's about essentially the value of natural disasters or people going through like times of war, or 9/11, or these seemingly terrible things. They end up snapping us back into reality of like, okay, you're my brother. Homeless guy on the street, or woman that I typically wouldn't talk to because she doesn't have enough Instagram followers, or like, no, we're in this together. Yeah.
It's that feeling of interdependence that... again, I realize I keep saying that people don't do enough of this and people don't do enough of that, but I think that feeling of interdependence, whether it's volunteering in your community or making yourself dependent on others by asking for help, is again something that's oft neglected. I mean, I had this wonderful, wonderful feeling wash over me today. I told you I stopped by the coffee shop on the way up here to grab a smoothie, and when I rode my bike in and docked at the coffee shop, there's a man in a wheelchair trying to get across the street. And I see him over there, and we lock eyes, and he asked me if I could help him across the street. Like, he said, can I have a push? So I started pushing him and across the street. So I'm pushing this guy in a wheelchair, and it's one of those homeless guys in Venice Beach, and he looks like he's got all his world's belongings right there in the little what do you call it? Almost like like a bicycle basket, but for a wheelchair. I don't know, wheelchair basket. Whatever, you carry your stuff around in. So I push him across the street, and he's like, "Can you push me up that hill?" Because the street starts to go up. So I keep pushing him up the hill, and then there's a full another block. And at this point, I'm getting nervous because my bike is parked down at the coffee shop. My cell phone is just sitting in a basket in the back of the bike, and so I push him for a good 6 minutes all the way to the Santa Monica beach, and then and he's like, "Thank you," and that feeling, washed over me of, okay, we're all interdependent humans. And then I turned around and just had to sprint, back down to the coffee shop to make sure the bicycle was still there.
Yeah.
But when you experience something like that, and this is the same reason I do that gratitude practice in the morning of who is one person I can pray for or help or serve today, you tap into that primal sense of us all being on this planet as a tribe and interdependent on each other. And in the same way that I think everyone should get sunlight or earthing or grounding or cold or heat or fresh air or any of these natural practices on a daily basis, I think everyone on a daily basis should figure out some way to go out of their way and help someone, or just be helped themselves, be interdependent and express that vulnerability to others.
Yeah. There's I was listening to old recordings of Terrence McKenna, and one of the things that he said that stood out was that culture is the main, the biggest separation between your own enlightenment, education, and decency. So when we have nationalism and the belief that our country is better than your country, my color is better than your color, essentially what that does is it just puts you into this isolation. But being able to break outside of that, I think that's where all the juice is at.
Yeah, and related to that, C.S. Lewis, and I'll completely bastardize this quote, but essentially he says in one of his books that we're all spirits, we're all souls, right? At our core. And I really get this when I gaze into someone's eyes, the windows to the soul. You make that connection and you realize this is a spirit, this is a soul, this is more than a chunk of flesh and blood that I'm talking to. It's something that's far deeper, something that's even eternal, right? That spark of light inside of us that is our ethereal being. And what C.S. Lewis says is that we're all spirits or souls, and every single person is capable of being a horrible monster or a god or goddess walking upon this planet. Each one of us has that capability for our soul to go one way or the other. And so it's one of those situations in which you almost need to be cautious, careful, that care for your soul, but you realize that you have potential to do great harm or potential to do very, very great good.
Yeah, I think I carry almost like a certain contraction or fear around the demon inside of me, or the evil inside of me, or the potential to, I hear things of some serial killer or some rapist or some Hitler or whatever. For that to exist in humanity, my belief is that exists inside of me and it exists inside of you. And we push that down and kind of pretend that those things don't exist, and we shame ourselves for having genitals, and we kind of put certain things in a box, and then certain other things are acceptable.
Yep.
But I wonder if there's something to loving all of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's and for me, coming from a Christian background, I think this is something Paul says in the Bible, about all of that evil and the people walking around who have twisted their soul or their spirit into becoming a monster, and he basically says something like, but for the grace of God, there go I. It's like, we all have that potential, and we should never take for granted the fact that we could easily stray into that same kind of Hitler-esque moment unless we're constantly careful, constantly watching ourselves, because that is kind of our bent in a way.
Yeah, my feeling is Hitler didn't want to be the Hitler that we know today when he was 6 and playing baseball.
Mm-hmm. Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And it's a big part of that is we tend to err towards what is societally acceptable, and as happened in Germany, If everybody else is doing it and it turns into the social norm, it becomes that much easier for us to do it.
Yeah.
To stray from that sense of what I really think is almost like that inherent built-in sense of what is right and wrong, and that internal moral compass that I do think we have, to instead kind of go almost more towards this Epicurean approach of like, well, there is no sense of universal morality. It's just like, this is what gives me pleasure and this is what gives me pain. And if everybody's getting pleasure from this certain, activity, then, it must be right. It must be okay or justifiable.
Yeah, there's a guy, James Prescott, that I mentioned in my the book that I've recently finished up, and is gets into war in societies and the amount of touch that they had growing up. And so he said with 80% accuracy, he was able to connect how much war there would be within that society just based off of the amount of contact they had from their mother, and
skin to skin contact. You mean?
Yeah. And there's other kind of completely other side of the spectrum research around the amount of contact in NBA teams in preseason. The teams that have the greatest contact, butt slaps, nice work, fucking chest bumps, like, man, we're together. Yeah. That cohesion and that attunement manifests itself into more victories.
So, we should probably hold hands for the rest of this podcast.
Yeah, that's what they do in all over the place. Southeast Asia. It's normal.
And then probably get oxytocin into the drinking water. Replace fluoride with oxytocin, and the world will be a happier place.
We just biohacked touch.
Yeah, I actually do. I do use I use intranasal oxytocin sometimes. It is a pretty amazing substance. It's the trust hormone, that's released during breastfeeding or sex or hugging. And the problem with it, of course, is you actually wouldn't want a lot of that in your system if you were going to go negotiate to purchase a used car or something like that, just because you become so trusting, so loving, so vulnerable.
So all the conversations of, it's really helpful to love each other and connect and touch and, not be selfish and all that stuff. Why do you think it is that humanity typically, at least like Western post-agriculture humanity, tends to veer towards autonomy and disconnection and my own and my bank account and all those things that the studies say that when you give somebody $1, it feels better than getting $1. But nonetheless, like, this seems like the tendency is to go the other direction.
Yeah, the independence at the cost of interdependence, I don't know, but I suspect part of it is due to the idea that we can take a great amount of pride in being self-made humans, self-made men, self-made women. We live in an era where, you're taught from an early age that you can be whatever you want to be, and that through almost, like this puritanical hard work mentality, that you can go it alone and be a lone wolf and still experience or possibly experience a greater amount of success. Like you've made it. You've become a lone wolf warrior. For me, being homeschooled K through 12 and very self-dependent, I think I err towards that even more than a lot of people, just because I had to be completely independent all through education and very self-reliant. And so I actually I enjoy the solitude, working alone, the silence, being solo, being a lone wolf. And it's really only in the past several years and increasingly, as my boys grow older and as I grow more connected to my family, that I realize the importance of this interdependence and the idea that independence, lone wolf success, despite often being a good way to make it in the world and to make a lot of money or be hyper productive, does not bring happiness, not as much as being with people and being dependent on others.
Yeah, it feels to me like the greatest currency any of us can possibly have, the only currency that's not going to go away, is connections and relationships and doing good by others.
Yeah, it's the greatest emotion. Love is. I mean, if you, and I tell my children this, if you ever do not know what to do in any situation, whether an interpersonal conflict or an argument or not knowing what to say to someone in a specific situation, you cover everything with love. Something as simple as, I love you, or figuring out a way you can care for someone, just anything like that. I mean, I've even had some conflicts with my wife before. We've gotten in arguments and we've had disagreements, and the only thing that seems to be able to just smooth things over at the time is to just huge hug. This isn't worth it. I love you. And all of a sudden love just frickin' melts away, all the pain and all the conflict. And it's that simple, but that sometimes takes disillusion of the ego, right? It takes humbleness. It takes, deciding that it's more worth it to simply say, I love you, and to hug someone rather than to keep on figuring out a way to win the argument or to prove that you're right.
Yeah. What do you think that has been most pivotal for you to start to recognize that?
When it comes to love, for me, it's been my family. The realization that they're the most important thing to me. And it's impossible for me to stay close and connected to my family without the Greenfield home being absolutely filled with love. Eye-gazing, snuggling, sexual connection with my wife, dates and time, mindful, devoted, focused time with my children. The amount of happiness and fulfillment that brings, that pouring that amount of love into my home brings, that's where it started for me. And then from there, realizing that same type of familial love that you give to your wife or your spouse or your children is the same type of love that you can take out into the world, into your career, right? And I don't think I have even come close to bringing to the world from stage, on my podcast, in my writings, in my interaction with people. I haven't come close to expressing the same amount of love in those scenarios as I do in the Greenfield home, when I'm just there with my wife and my boys. And I'm currently on, almost like a quest to take that same love that I've experienced with my family and bring that forth into the rest of the world. But for me, it had to start at home with my wife and with my boys. The deep realization that it's love and connection with the family that kind of equips me and empowers me to go forth and bring that same love to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Because my MO for the longest time was you have your family time, then you go out in the world, and then you're that lone independent wolf, who's, all about business and very didactic, education, teaching others about fitness and health and nutrition, but with nowhere near the amount of love that's expressed with the family, on the home front. And I recently read a book, I believe it was called The Second Mountain or something like that, but it's about how we spend much of our lives climbing this first mountain: career, success, finances, making it almost from a business standpoint. And we reach the top of that first mountain in a very independent way. And when we get to the top of that first mountain, sometimes cancer or sickness or conflict or bankruptcy or something can throw us down from the top of that first mountain down into a valley. And that's sometimes what happens is we're down there in the valley. Sometimes we're just still at the top of the first mountain, and we get that realization that there's not as much fulfillment and happiness that we've gotten by climbing to the top of that first mountain as we anticipated or expected when we were climbing it.
Yeah.
And at that point, we realize there's a second mountain. And that second mountain is a mountain where the top of it is where true fulfillment lies. It is a mountain that we climb with others. It's a mountain where we discover interdependence and community and family and some of those things we were talking about earlier, right? That deep human primal urge for connection and relationships. And that second mountain might be something completely different, like founding a charitable organization, or taking your time that you spent on the business and focusing instead on music or art that touches other people's hearts, or building a community, or getting to know your neighbors better, or whatever the case may be. But it's that second mountain that's the most important mountain. And I feel like, for me, I'm kind of like, 1/20th of the way up that second mountain after climbing that first mountain and realizing that there's a lot freaking more to life than, what you experience at the top of that first mountain.
Yeah, I feel like one of my biggest fears would be that I would die, leave this body, before reaching the false summit of the first mountain. Mm-hmm. And at that point, you essentially missed out on life.
Yeah. You did. And, I guess, the thing is, it's not like the first mountain is bad.
Mm-mm.
The first mountain
it's
it's Maslow's hierarchy.
Yeah, it's a lesson.
Right? You have to get shelter and food and currency and to a certain extent, the ability to be able to get by and survive before you're almost like fully equipped to climb that second mountain. I think that some people kind of climb the first and the second mountain at the same time, develop a business that's just extremely others-facing and is doing a great deal of good in the world. And I think that that's a very fortunate place to be in. But I don't think people should beat themselves up for trying to make a career and get some money in their bank account and figure out a way to become somewhat financially independent before turning around and saying, okay, what's next? What's greater than this? Now that I'm set, now that I've put on my own oxygen mask, how can I then go forth and help others?
Yeah.
So I don't think there's shame in that first mountain. I just think that you definitely shouldn't fool yourself into thinking that that's the end all.
Yeah. Do you think perhaps isolating those two mountains, and I'm sure there's lots more mountains beyond that, into their own separate buckets, do you think that is a Western culture, again, post-agricultural age, technological age, like going into that, like, okay, in a more natural, in quotations, whatever the heck that means, hunter-gatherer, tribal, whatever society, do you think that those buckets would naturally more converge?
It's possible that mountains might not be the best analogy. Perhaps a better analogy would be chapters in a book, right?
Yeah.
Chapter 1, you're getting to know some of the characters and laying down the background scene and in the ordinary world, and in chapters 3 and 4 and 5, maybe there's a realization that there's more to life than this, and there's that resistance to the call, if we're looking at the book as the classic hero's journey, and then eventually a crossing of the threshold towards something greater. And when you're progressing and progressing and progressing, and you're never reading a book like that, whether any classic hero's journey, the Wizard of Oz or the Disney movie Frozen, or the story of Rocky Balboa, or any of these hero's journeys. You're never following a book or a storyline like that and thinking that what you've just read, the chapter that you're in, the chapters that came before, sucked, right? They were just all part of the hero's journey. They were all crucial in leading up to the ultimate climax, the battle, the fight for the elixir, the return with the elixir, and the eventual, happy ever after story, at the very end of the book. But if you look at it as kind of a chapter by chapter type of deal, there's no regrets about the chapters that came before. There's just the realization that, if you truly want to live out the full hero's journey, you need to have your eyes set on continuing chapter by chapter towards the resolution of the book.
Yeah. Then and Joe Campbell's stuff, the same. One of the steps is the process of detribalization, which is the exact same thing that Terrence was saying, and lots of other people say. Like, that's a crucial part is stepping outside that. I wonder, with raising kids, do you have any have you noticed the first instance of shame pop up with your kids? Like, pre when I am my mother and I am, theory of mind, all that, and the separation happened, I think it would be hard to be ashamed of anything. But then there's a moment where, like, oh, my penis isn't big enough, or my anus looks weird, or I'm not tall enough, or too short, or whatever.
I can't say I have.
Cool.
Our house is Well, from a shame standpoint, it's pretty hippy dippy. Nobody's got their clothes on. The mailman always has to knock on the door. Like we're just, the Greenfield boys just walk around naked. And my boys see me doing so many weird things, whatever, with all the biohacks and infrared light panels. And, they'll come in to brush their teeth while Dad's laying on the floor of the bathroom doing a coffee enema. Like we're just, there's not a lot of I guess, potential for shame in the Greenfield house. And so, no, I haven't seen that yet. But one practice that I think has been really beneficial for connectedness, not just with my wife and I, but also with my children and I, has been that eye gazing that I talked about earlier, right? Just, when I can take River or I can take Taryn and embrace them, as usually this is as we're about to go to sleep, like before bed when I'm in there, I've read them a story or played them the guitar or the ukulele, and this is a practice that I've only adopted for the past year, but you look at your child in the eyes, and it's one of those zero judgment zones. And sometimes I'll just be like, sorry to freak you out here, but I'll just be like
right.
going like this, just like caressing their hair, looking deep into their eyes, and they'll reach up and start to caress my hair. And you're just making this deep soul connection. And for me, it's like I see a different part of my child every time. Like the shape of their nose has changed, or the turn of their lips, or I'll see, a glimpse of the shape of my wife's eyes and their eyes, or sometimes I'll look at their fingers and think about how their hands kind of look like my hands looked when I was 11 years old. And I think that's a big part of it too, is when you have that kind of a deep connection every day with your parent or with your child, I think it's harder to feel that shame because there's just that deep, vulnerable, open acceptance when you're right there looking into each other's eyes. The same could be said for sex. I think one of the most powerful things that my wife and I have adopted as part of our sexual relationship is that same type of eye gazing, that deep spiritual connection, that foregoing of almost like the mutual masturbation that I think a lot of sex really is for a lot of people. I mean, you're rubbing your genitals together until something explodes or something cool happens, and that's sex, right? And then you roll over and go to sleep, or whatever the case may be. And I think that that deep acceptance during sex as well, that deep spiritual connection, is also very important, with your lover.
Yeah.
So,
it's interesting with you. It seems almost like you're the father and you're taking care of your kids, but it almost feels as though your kids you could look at it from another lens and see that they're here for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's really, it's a great and powerful responsibility, bringing another human being into the world, but it really is, just from almost like a selfish standpoint, one of the best things you can do for yourself. I mean, not only spiritually, that feeling of responsibility and that interdependence that arises when you have a child, their interdependence on you, your interdependence on them. But just from a pure logistical standpoint, I mean, it was when I had kids that I established a trust, right? Began to build a legacy, began to think more about the future, about, my home, my castle, where our roots were going to be, where we were going to live, the connections to family, the living will, the testament, all these things, family traditions. Well, shit, what is our family tradition for Christmas? What is our family tradition for Thanksgiving? Like, how are we going to, begin to build this Greenfield name, Greenfield traditions, Greenfield family that will hopefully go on to, for generations and generations, be able to help the world. It reminds me of this quote that I heard a couple of weeks ago that just really struck me. It gave me pause. It was this: you're not raising your children, you're raising your grandchildren. Right? When you think about everything that you do with your kids, whether or not you have your phone out at the dinner table, or when you're out on a date with your children, or do you have story time at night? Do you play music at night? Do you have a gratitude practice in the morning? Do you have a specific tradition on Christmas or on Thanksgiving? Do you have a time of the month when you might, go and deliver Meals on Wheels or help someone or, bring a bottle of wine up to the neighbors? These are the things that your children are going to be teaching to their grandchildren, right? And if your family practice is watching Netflix while everyone's got a tray, and eating dinner, in front of the TV, and everyone's got their phone out, when you're at the restaurant, and Christmas arrives and you just kind of, casually figure out if you're going to go here or you're going to go there. Like there's no real tradition on Christmas Eve, or, there's everybody just kind of like hits the sack at the end of the night, and there's no end cap on the day of gratitude or storytelling or music or anything like that. That's exactly what your kids are going to do with their kids, and their kids with their kids. So what you do now with your children sets up just a generational butterfly effect for what's going to happen on down the line. And that's a great and powerful responsibility, realizing you're not changing. It's hard on a Thursday night, when dinner rolls around, to be thinking about that. Take out the gratitude journals and have a moment of parasympathetic silence over the food, and have a wonderful chat at dinner, and push the chairs away, and everybody cleans up the kitchen together, and you go upstairs and maybe have a little story time, play some music, do the eye gazing and the snuggling. All of that gets instilled into your children and carries on into the future generation. So it's a great and powerful responsibility to be able to build that, and it stacks. Just that simple practice one night of the week and the next night of the week. It's going to streamline down to future generations.
Yeah, I think it's like you can't. At some point, you have to pay the responsibilities. Like you have to invest and do the thing, and you can temporarily push things off and kind of spend on credit. But at some point, you're just squishing the toothpaste around. All of a sudden, you have this backfill on the other end, and you'll have to pay bigger at some point. So I think like the way that we started the conversation is, how can we effectively integrate all of these health-inducing variables so that I just have this well-being sandwich that I'm moving through the world with? I think that's like, the more that we can do that, the happier life that we will have in the future, and the less likely we are to have, lots of debt.
Yeah. The other thing I would encourage to people who are listening is, if you have an exercise habit, or you have a meditation habit, or a breathwork habit, or a cold pool habit, or a sauna habit, or any of these things that you kind of use to keep you sane during the day, to tweak your biology, to maintain your health. I was once reading in a magazine, it was a triathlon magazine, about being an invisible exerciser, right? Like you get up at 4 a.m., you just get all this shit done so that you can, be present for your family later on in the day. But I kind of think it's the opposite. I think as much as you can include, if you have children, your children in those type of habits, and I do this with my kids sometimes. So I'm going to go to a 30-minute sauna session. They'll come in for the first 5 or 10 minutes, right? Sit, meditate. All right, guys, you're good. Go do your thing, or I'll go jump in the cold pool, and they'll come in and jump in with me, and they might, stay in a minute, and I'm swimming around in there for 5 minutes. But just these brief exposures for your offspring to be able to get a flavor of these habits that you're using to make your life better, that keeps them from whatever, turning 18, going to college, gaining weight on beer and pizza, having no clue how to be mindful or meditate, starting their job, climbing that first mountain, rinsing, washing, repeating, and re-experiencing the errors that you might have gone through. And then, when they're 35, they discover intermittent fasting and meditation and sauna and breath work and cold. But returning to that, you're raising your grandchildren, not your children. They might not teach that to their kids because you didn't teach it to them. Right. Yeah. So the more you can expose your kids to this kind of stuff, like early on in life, the better.
Yeah, we'll wrap this up. I one thing that's just popping up is there's a guy called Albert Morabian, came up with this thing called the 55-38-7 principle. He's a UCLA professor, and essentially what it was is that 55% of our communication was based off of body language, the way we move, and then 38 was tonality, and then 7% was the actual words that we're saying. That's based if there is some type of incongruency there. So if I say something, but my body says something else, 93% of the time you're like, no, I don't think that's right.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same thing with when you're spending time with your family or any relationship. Like your kids, my sense is they probably don't give that many shits what you say. It's more like actually being with you. And what's your level of compassion and empathy and listening, and what do you actually do? And then the other thing that pops up is, I think it's really valuable to have momentum going into a connection with somebody. So you can't just be a jerk off for the whole day and eating the wrong food and thinking about the wrong things and looking at the wrong things, and and then all of a sudden show up, okay, it's family time.
Yep.
It's like, no, your kids are sensitive beings, and they're picking up on you from before right now.
Yeah.
So, anyhow.
Yeah. The power of demonstration and practicing what you preach, especially when it comes to parenting, cannot be undervalued. I mean, and I parent with this love and logic philosophy where you don't tell your kids what to do. You educate them on the consequences of their decisions and then let them make the decision. And you must, in order for that type of parenting to be successful, demonstrate in your day-to-day habits what the right decisions actually are, right? So it's never like, whatever, River, Taryn, go take your vitamin D supplement, right? It's like, Dad just gets up in the morning, I take my vitamin D, and usually I do it when they're sitting there at the breakfast nuke table and they can see me doing what I'm doing, right? And the same can be said for eating habits, right? Like if you tell them that gluten's bad for them, but then the whole family goes out to the steakhouse and you're punishing, 4 slices of that sourdough bread they bring out, then, that sends a message to your kids. So, that's, again, having children really makes you step up your game big time.
Cool, man. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me on, man.
I appreciate our conversations.
Yeah, it's always good to do the breath work and the ice beforehand. It puts you in a good place.
It's the best, yeah. And then for folks listening, we'll have the video of breath work, ice, and maybe we'll put some kind of like tutorial instructional thing on how to make that shit happen.
We'll Photoshop away all the shrinkage that occurs in the ice bath.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah. That was my first nude ice bath pre-podcast.
Yeah,
you stepped up my game.
Blur as much as possible. Now, as we were talking about earlier, I think before we started recording, you'll need to blur at least down to my kneecaps.
That's right.
I'm sure.
No, that's right.
Yeah, there's a lot of blurring.
Yeah, it's gonna be big blurry. Yeah, it's gonna be expensive. It's gonna be very expensive. Yeah. Where should people go from here? Where's the best direction?
Got a new book, boundlessbook.com, and I've been working on that thing for like 3 years. It's finally out, it's ready, and it's just like a massive tome for all things body, mind, spirit optimization. So a lot in there, and I'm super proud of it. And I guess that'd be my only ask is people go check out the book.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Cool. Do you think, I can cut this part out, do you think this is going to be a co-released thing, or do you think it's of relevance for you to mention my shit?
Yeah, so I will probably publish this on my show.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I'd love for people who aren't familiar with you, if you could maybe mention, mention whatever your Instagram handle, your website. You have a new book, so tell people about Aaron Alexander and where they can get more of you.
Yeah. So have the Align Method is coming out December 24th, and so I don't know when we're going to publish this exactly.
The Align Method is the book.
That's the book. Yeah, it's coming up. So that's been I co-wrote that with Phil White, who he's done stuff with Kelly Starrett and Andy Galpin and Brian McKenzie and Laird Hamilton and all sorts of great folks. Each chapter I had reviewed from the world leading expert on whatever the thing is, breaking down the way that sight affects your physiology and sound and body language and touch and all the things that we kind of briefly touched on in this conversation. So that's at thealignbook.com is the pre-sale. And then Instagram handle is Align Podcast, and this will go up on the Align Podcast as well.
Yeah, thealignbook.com, and I did thumb through it, you guys, and it's good. Photos, exercises, practical shit, which I like.
It's all practical shit. Essentially, it's written for the Instagram age, So it's written in like breaths, so you can take information in, and then you can there's a moment, and you can go to the next heading, and there's like humor and philosophy and mechanics.
Did you get like butt implants or calf implants since it's not on Instagram age?
Not on this one, but yeah, I think on the next one I'll probably have to step up my game.
Just go full on Kardashian.
Yeah,
good man.
I think I'm ready.
All right, cool. Thanks, man.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate it.
That was great. Picture of you down here? Yeah.
Hope you guys enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. I want to present y'all with a fun opportunity of starting a program that I created called the Align Method Online Program that focuses on unwinding the unsightly patterns of staring into technology, essentially. So forward head posture, rolled forward shoulders, hyperkyphotic spine, disengaged glutes, knees collapsing in. If there's collapse in any level in the body, it will trickle up and down through the rest of the system. And that program focuses on unwinding those things, giving you self-care practices, movement practices, and lifestyle adjustments, very subtle ones, that will give y'all more flexibility, more strength, more confidence, more energy, all the good things. And you can start the first week absolutely free, and just go to alignpodcast.com/align method, ALIGN method. Along with that, guy, you will receive the Align band, which is a heavy-duty resistance band with a door anchor, and that also comes with its own online program that is free with that thing. Go to alignband.com and start that program for free. I think that's it. I so greatly appreciate you guys listening to this conversation. So greatly appreciate reviews on iTunes, sharing on the Instagrams or the Facebooks or wherever you do your shares. This program goes on, lives on because of y'all. So it doesn't go unnoticed. Thank you for listening. Thank you for reviews. Thanks for joining your life. Enjoy.